Just around the corner, there's a rainbow in the sky.
Yeah. So thank you for taking a minute out. I appreciate you talking about the album and your life in music.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where are you located?
I'm currently in San Antonio, Texas.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I haven't been down to that part, but I hear that it's a beautiful city, so I need to make it down there.
It is actually. It's in the Texas Hill Country. Pretty good culture. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm in one of the cradles of jazz. I'm in Kansas City, Missouri. So
Nice.
yeah, that's where we're coming out of. So, well, before we get into Silent Boomer X, I want to begin with one of the more magnanimous things we've lived through, which was the pandemic. And 4 years ago, it was raging. We didn't know when we were going to get out of it and how it was really going to affect us. How did you ultimately make it through that time period? And how did it change the way that you do things now?
Absolutely, man. Well, at the time, I was living in Brooklyn. I'm also a social worker. I was working at Woodhull Hospital, it's a city hospital in Brooklyn, and Bed-Stuy. I was working in inpatient psych, and then bam, the pandemic hit. And so, it was stressful for everybody. I unlike people around me in my music community, I kept going to work every day on the front line, riding my bike to work. So certainly music was a part of my mental health. Making music, I guess at that point in time, changed to making music by myself a lot. But also I have a spiritual path that I'm really into, Thich Nhat Hanh's Zen Buddhist tradition, Plum Village tradition. So I took refuge in that big time. I was already taking refuge in that as a social worker, just person on the planet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and then I did that for about a year working as a social worker at Woodhull and just riding that wave. And then my dad got sick, actually, not with COVID, luckily, but he has COPD really bad. So COVID would have definitely taken him out. So I ended up moving down to Texas a year later. And for the last 4 years, I've been caring for him. So that was a huge life shift that I probably wouldn't have been willing to take if COVID hadn't have stopped everybody's life and kind of created this different kind of context. And what that's done since is given me a lot more space to be musical. I was definitely working as a full-time as a social worker, plus working as a waiter too, in New York to make ends meet. So since I've been down here, I just work part-time as a social worker, have much more time for music, much more time for spiritual life. So it's actually been a really deep, meaningful shift. And it's allowed me to do things like, put my own records out, which I was struggling to do, working all the time.
Absolutely. So talk to me about the latest album. What was kind of the overarching vision for this album?
Yeah, well, the basic premise is that we're actually working at Woodhull. I started working in 2015 there, and there's a great creative arts therapist there, Frank Wagner, who's a great bass player, and he and I are in the same treatment team, sat next to each other, and slowly got to realize, hey, we get along, we like each other. Oh, we're jazz musicians. Oh, okay, cool. Oh, you jam with your buddies. Oh, okay, cool. So then I started going to his place on the Upper West Side for jam sessions, which at the time was very much needed music therapy. And I played with a lot of his friends, and we did that pretty regularly. And then we just kind of fell in with another dear friend of his, CJ Everett, who's a drummer, who was his neighbor on the Upper West Side. And so we had a good vibe. So we did that for a few years. And in 2019, we were like, man, let's record this. This is great. And so that's, but personally, I have a jazz vocal jazz education, background. And I just, I wasn't so stoked about, the traditional path of being a jazz vocalist. It just has always been kind of an up and down ride for me. And personally, I'm really into instrumental jazz. That's kind of where I get my spiritual connection in music, is through instrumental jazz. And so what I really liked about playing with Frank and CJ was that there was no chordal instrument, no piano, no guitar. And it just gave me a lot more space to solo and to be instrumental and to do that. And you know, since we made that recording, I've continued on that path of trying to be more instrumental with my voice, you know, like Bobby McFerrin. And Pat Metheny's band has a lot of instrumental vocals that actually I listened to a lot when I was growing up. I know you're in Lee Summit, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Pat
So I mean,
Metheny.
so that is such a direct line for me. His Pat Metheny's music, but this particular ensemble, I mean, you know, what made the most sense for us was to play jazz standards, which is not necessarily my my cup of tea. You know, but I have the training for it, and so you know, it was a cool opportunity to find something fresh, something original um, in the lineage of vocal jazz. So that's kind of the frame for it.
Yeah. So what are you hoping the listener gets from this album? What's your hope?
Just something, you know, a fresh take, you know, something, you know, I mean, ultimately, I want to bring joy to people and make people feel at ease and maybe interested in looking deeply. I mean, certainly the things that I get from music are just to relax and to kick back and to bring my awareness to something that's soothing and hopefully meaningful. You know, hopefully go on some kind of emotional journey. You know. The songs themselves are kind of on the older end of things. You know, they're older songs, a lot of them from the 30s. And so kind of looking to, you know, expose some music that's not so mainstream in jazz, you know. So maybe bring the listeners awareness to another time, something fresh there. Yeah, but ultimately, one of my goals in this music is not to overdo it and not to put on a big show and just kind of be chill, you know, and
Yeah.
relaxed and take it easy,
Yeah.
which is what, you know, a lot of times when I'm checking out vocal jazz, I feel a little uncomfortable by the intensity of the affect of the performers, just to be honest. And so I hope that this can, you know, people who might not be into vocal jazz necessarily uh, might open up to something that's a little bit more easygoing and chill, and not so much about the performance, but more about what's going on. You know, if you look a little bit closer, if you look a little bit more deeply, there's a lot of, you know, empathy and connection going on, much like in instrumental music.
So how did this journey into the music begin for you?
Oh, you know, I mean, you know, like many people, loved music growing up, and you know, I mean, I've always loved improvisation, and I think, like many children, playing with music and improvising is like a source of joy for a lot of kids, you know. But really, I got into music through listening, you know, Michael Jackson and whatever, and the Beatles and music that my parents were playing. And then when I was young, I got into the community theater here. I grew up in Houston and then moved to New York to go to music school for college. Um, so yeah, I got into community theater, and luckily it was, you know, I grew up in a pretty normal suburban environment, but all the weirdos and cool people were at this community theater, and I was good at singing, you know, and I got a lot of encouragement, and you know, and then I got really into choir, and luckily in Texas, you know, there was money in the high schools and middle schools for choir, so I got a lot of support there. And then I went to high school of performing visual arts in Houston, and there was a lot of love for jazz there, so that kind of kept me going. Um, yeah, and then I went to music school in New York, and then had to figure out how to pay rent. Became a social worker. Yeah, yeah.
What was the first live jazz show you saw that blew you away?
First live jazz show, yeah. Through the musical theater community, my director, his partner was a jazz pianist, and so luckily, when I was like still in middle school, I started checking out our family friend Dave Catney. He's a jazz pianist here in Houston, or you know, where I was growing up. And so I got to go to a cool hip jazz club. The only one that I remember in Houston was called Cezanne. It's no longer around. And Dave curated that club, and he was a great pianist. And so I started listening to his records. My parents had the CDs, and I knew the guy, and I got to go see him. I was probably 12 the first time I went to see it, but seeing him in the room with somebody I cared about with other musicians, I mean, I remember the point where jazz sounded like background music, and then kind of, okay, I know this person, I care about them, and I oh, this is cool. Oh, look what they're doing. They're doing something different with music that I didn't understand. I'd never seen before. They're communicating in this way, and so it was a really cool way in. I mean, honestly, I loved Billy Joel and Paul Simon at the time, and I started noticing that a lot of the saxophone solos in that music, like the Phil Woods, Michael Brecker stuff, I was being drawn to that too around that same time. So, okay, I like this other dimension that is there in the music, not just what the singer is doing. So I got to give props to my parents for bringing me, and I'm always feeling connected to Dave. Dave passed away of AIDS in '94 at 33, which is crazy to think about. But I still listen to him all the time. I still play his music, and feel very lucky and grateful that I got to see him, and that he was really sweet to me. And he was like, "This is something you can do. This is cool." So.
So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
That's a great question. I mean, something that I work on, as a Buddhist. I don't want to be too caught in my idea of myself as a singer or as a social worker. So, my perception, I want to be somebody who is kind and awake and there to be present for people. And I definitely value service, as a singer, as a musician, the service of music and its healing potential. And then as a social worker, and I'm a caregiver to my father, and that has a lot of meaning for me. But the trick for me, the identity of being a musician is kind of a dead end for me personally. It's something that all through my life I've just never been inspired by. I'll have a moment of inspiration, and I'll try to do something, make something happen, but it's not what sustains me. I mean, what sustains me is actually spiritual life and community and kindness, that kind of vibe. So whatever I can do to continue to work on, cultivating that intention as a musician and kind of freeing myself from the identity piece, I'm finding that the more I can do that, the more sustainable my musical life is, and the more I want to make music and share music with people, but not from the context of, hey, look at me, or I want to be this, please love me.
Yes.
So that's the vibe I'm going for.
So Silent Boomer X is the new album. If anyone wants to pick it up, catch you live, any of the good business, where do they go?
Well, at this point, it'll be streaming on all platforms this Friday, the 23rd of August. Still putting the I live in San Antonio in Texas, so still really trying to work out a CD release show where we can all get together in September, October. But so nothing's set in stone. But we're looking to get a release show in New York in a few months. So it's really just an online thing for now, and it will be on, of course, Apple Music and Spotify and YouTube and everywhere else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. This has been wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate your story. I appreciate your time. Best of luck with the release.
Thanks, Joe. I really appreciate it, man.
Yes.